All right, welcome to part two of the perspectives on justice. All right, so in this lecture, we're going to take a look at the non-interventionist equal justice and the restorative justice perspectives. And then at the end of the lecture, we'll talk a little bit more about how you're going to be using this for this week's discussion. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's talk about the non-interventionist perspective. So the main focus of the non-intervention perspective is to minimize contact with the criminal justice system. From this perspective, they see that much of the interaction with the criminal justice system causes harm, and that it often causes more harm than the offense itself. Okay, and so just think about some of the recent ways that we've seen, a lot of harm come from an initial contact with law enforcement, right? I mean, a lot of, the police use of force has revolved around, police at traffic stops, pulling somebody over for not using their turn signal, pulling somebody over because they have an air freshener on the back of their mirror. And then look at the harm that comes out of that, right? The person who gets pulled over is aggravated by that. It's often a person of color. And then it just escalates from there, right? And sometimes it escalates to the point of somebody losing their life. That's an extreme example, but, that from a non-interventionist perspective, they're like, do you really need to be pulled over for not using your turn signal? What? It's not that harmful. Let it go. And another example would be when somebody's like charged with a misdemeanor for a crime, but a crime that's not super harmful. That they something like, let's say, a theft of personal property. Okay. Oftentimes that has sort of a reverberating effect. If you're charged with a misdemeanor and then you appear in court and that to learn about the charges and the arraignment, and then a bail is set, even if it's a moderate amount of money, a lot of people cannot make bail, and then that has a sort of dominoes effect on their life. They can't make bail, so they sit in the city or the county jail, which, as we know, are not good places to be, and that can also lead to losing your job. Can then lead to not being able to pay your rent and losing your apartment, and so on and so forth. So their focus is to really minimize the contact with the criminal justice system. Now, as you're going to see, that's not saying that it should just be anarchy. People should do whatever they want, but they're basically their viewpoint is focus on the crimes that are most harmful and let the rest don't focus as much on them. And so we touched a little bit on why they think it's harmful, but I'll put all of these up here so we can look at these individually. That the more contact you have with law enforcement, and this is particularly true with younger folks, that a stigma comes about it, right? You're the kid who's getting pulled over by cops. We have cops or police officers in schools, right? Then, that rather than dealing with it through a guidance counselor, then you kind of get brought into the criminal justice system. Then you get labeled as the pre-criminal or the criminal, right? And then sometimes that labeling can have, and you'll read about this in the textbook, that it can, it has sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You all see me as a criminal, well, then I'm going to act like a criminal, okay? It's harmful because it can, the interactions with the criminal justice system can disrupt families, communities. As we mentioned, that you can't make bail, so then you lose your job, potentially impact your family and your community, and then it can have this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? As I mentioned before, through the labeling. The effects of institutionalization can be profound. One of the things that, I used the example of the night of the HBO show earlier in topic one. One of the things I love about that show is how it shows a young man who's a college student who basically sits in Rikers Island waiting for his trial for the murder. And he's not prepared to be at Rikers Island. He's not a gang member. He doesn't have any sort of experience with that. The only way he survives is by getting protection from one of the toughest gang members in there. And Nazir Khan changes. He becomes, a criminal kind of, in order to survive. And that is the effects of that institutionalization. And so they think it's harmful because all of these things can, contribute to crime commission, right? You go to prison, you hang around with criminals, it might be difficult to change your ways. That crime commission, when you lose your job, your family is disrupted, right? All of those things can have that impact on reasons why a person might commit a crime. So, what does the non-interventionist perspective place emphasis on? Well, they place emphasis on focusing on the most violent crimes and decriminalization of nonviolent victimless crimes. So, as I said in the last slide, it's not like they're like anarchy, do whatever you want. They're basically saying let the criminal justice system should focus on the most dangerous crimes: murder, manslaughter, aggravated assault, armed robbery, and then deprioritize the other crimes. And that not only that, but that that certain nonviolent crimes, so-called victimless crimes, should not be crimes. They should be decriminalized. And so that would include drug distribution, prostitution, gambling, pornography. Not child pornography, right? And not sex trafficking, but prostitution. Those kinds of activities should. Who's the victim in that, right? When you want to sell your body and somebody gets pleasure from purchasing your services, who's the victim there? Okay. Oh, we could, I teach power and public policy, so we could debate that. There's lots of debates to be had, but that's their perspective. And they really think that since institutionalization has such profound effects on the person and also the family and the community, they are really advocates for alternatives to incarceration for non-violent offenders. Okay, and so that is the non-interventionist perspective. So that brings us to perspective 5, equal justice. And so the main focus of the equal justice perspective is ensuring that all people receive the same treatment under the law. Okay, sort of a focus on equal protection of the law. So here you can sort of see some overlap between the equal justice perspective and the due process perspective. Okay, that no one's above the law, no one's below the law. The law should apply equally to everybody, regardless of their status within society. And from their perspective, why do they think that people commit crimes? Well, they think that people commit crimes for many reasons. But when a person is subject to unequal justice, that can result in frustration, which can aid recidivism, which is a fancy word for repeating your offense, becoming a repeat offender. And so if you feel like you're constantly being pulled over by police because of your race, right, or because of your age, because you're younger, then you're going to get frustrated, right? And that frustration, again, kind of dovetailing it back into due process, it can tear away at our social contract, right? That we all follow the rules and we're all sort of treated equally. So that frustration and that can result in crime commission. And also, let's say that you were incarcerated, and let's say that and this happens a lot, that you're up for parole, and you go before the parole board, and you follow all the rules, and you've done everything that they've said, but you still don't get paroled. But that's somebody else who's in the same boat as you, right? They do get paroled. Well, that can be frustrating and could potentially, aid in the sense of, when I get out of here, what's preventing me from, engaging in a crime again. And much like the due process, that unequal justice can lead to this lack of trust within the criminal justice system. And if you don't trust the criminal justice system, then you're not likely to follow the laws, the criminal laws. So the equal justice perspective places emphasis on the equal treatment of offenders regardless of class, race, gender, age. Okay, and they're basically saying that your ability to defend yourself shouldn't be based on your class. That we should invest in public defenders so that they can defend somebody who who's indigent, does not have a lot of money, that they can do that in a way that provides for an effective defense. They also focus on the way that, women are sometimes treated differently than men within the criminal justice system. That they are concerned about that. But I would say the thing that they're most concerned about is race. And the equal justice perspective is very aware of this concept that is talked about in your textbook, which is called the racial animus model. And the racial animus model is that, if I'm not making this up, and we're going to be learning about this in the 13th, the documentary that we're going to watch. But if you ask people to close their eyes and imagine what a criminal looks like, people, and this is black folks and white folks, they say what they imagine. They have a mental image of an offender being young, male, black, and without any remorse, right? I think the Clintons coined the term super predator, right? And that's kind of stems from that racial animus model. Now, that racial animus model is nothing new. And when we watch the 13th, you're going to see that there's been a long-term sort of campaign in the United States, in particular after the end of slavery, to sort of situate black men as criminals without remorse, and that carries over into today. And so they want the system to be very mindful of that. They want to make sure that race is not taken into perspective when it comes to criminal justice. If you imagine that that's what an offender looks like, and you are the head of a police department, where are you going to mobilize your folks, right? Where are you going to mobilize your police officers? In areas that have the most black young men, right? And they are really opposed to that, as we all should be. But they also say that, they're not only wanting equal treatment for class, race, gender, age, but they also say if you committed the same offense, same sentence, truth in sentencing. And we have truth in sentencing in Wisconsin. So there's a sense that when you don't have sort of set guidelines about sentencing, then somebody can commit the same crime, but their sentence is going to be either a lot lower or a lot higher than somebody who committed the same offense. And so they think truth in sentencing provides a sort of equal playing field, not equal playing field, but this equality in terms of the sentences that people receive. And that a person should be punished not for their past or what was perceived will happen in the future, but you are punished for what you've done in the present, okay? And so those are all features of the equal justice perspective. And last but not least is the restorative justice perspective. So the main focus of the restorative justice perspective is to create a just and peaceful society. And they want to repair the breach, the harm that comes from crime. And that's why it's called restorative justice, that when crimes are committed, they want to restore that society back to its just and peaceful place. Now, when you read that, right, you're like, well, the restorative justice perspective, it's like a bunch of hippies, out in the woods, like holding hands and singing Kumbaya with criminal offenders in order to make a more just and peaceful society. That is not what the restorative justice process is or perspective is by any means. What it is, so we'll talk about what it is in a second, but, from their perspective, why do people commit crimes? Well, I think there's many reasons why people commit crimes, but that one reason, and this is how it relates to their perspective, is that when people commit crimes, they fail to understand the harm that their crime has caused, right? And they think part of the reason for that is that when you commit a crime, you're mostly brought in to this abstract kind of punitive state. You commit a crime, and then you're with police officers. Then you're arraigned, you can't make bail, then you're in county jail. And then you're found guilty, and then you're sent away to the penitentiary, right? And, maybe in your trial, you might have heard some victim testimony, but you really, as an offender, never got an opportunity, they would see it as an opportunity, to actually confront and meet with, not confront, but for the victims to confront you, to tell them how your crime profoundly changed their life, and have you, the offender, sit and listen to that, right? And they really think that when an offender understands the harm that they caused, not only do they understand it for themselves, but they can transmit that to others around them, right? If you don't have that opportunity, you really don't know what impact stealing a car has on somebody's life, what impact, stealing money, what impact getting robbed, an armed robbery has on an individual's life. And so if you're given the opportunity to confront that, you can internalize it and really think more deeply about the crime. And so for them, the resolution of a conflict should take place within the community with those who are affected by your harmful act, not solely abstractly by a punitive state. Not that there isn't a place for the criminal justice system in that, but that's not the only place where that conflict should be resolved. So from the restorative justice perspective, what is the best way to prevent crimes? Well, the best way to prevent crimes and also prevent reoffending is for the victim to confront the offender, right? And they have these things called restorative justice circles. In the topic commentary for this week, Marquette Law has a big restorative justice program. Van Jones on CNN has done a big series on the work that he's done with offenders in restorative justice. And a lot of it shows victims, confronting an offender, having the offender listen to the harm that person caused. They actually see and experience through the sort of the confessing or the telling of the impact that the crime had on this person. They actually get to see the harm that it caused by the crime they committed. Not just the harm to the victim, but to the victim's family and the victim's community, the people that the victim works for, and so they kind of get to see, and think more deeply about the impact of their crime. And that the punishment from this perspective is oftentimes, but not solely, linked to repairing the harm that's caused. If it's something like vandalism or property damage, right, and restorative justice, then the individual can go and spend the day repairing the harm that they did to somebody's business, right, or maybe working at the store in order to make up for the lost, revenue at the store. But even in more serious crimes, right, you meet with the person and then, you sort of try to make amends and share with where the offender was coming from, why they did what they did, right? And so that it can move more towards this sort of understanding of the victim's experience, but also get a deeper understanding and see the offender as being more fully human, right? And when you see an offender as being more fully human, when they're given this opportunity, it's really more that reintegration back into society is more likely to happen. So it is easier to pursue restorative justice with nonviolent crimes, although it has been used for violent crimes as well, with a variety of success. So you're going to be reading an article this week called "The Limits of Restorative Justice in Jacksonville." Read it. There will be 2 questions on the reading quiz this week on that, so you've been alerted to that. But it does kind of give you a good idea of what restorative justice is, but also some of the pitfalls associated with this perspective as well. All right, so let's talk about this week's discussion and how you're going to be applying these 6 perspectives in our discussion for this week. Okay, so when you go to the discussion, you're going to see that there's like a link that you click on, and every student in the class has been assigned a perspective, okay? Due process, crime control, whatever, okay? So you have your own individual perspective. The first thing you're going to be asked is describe what your assigned perspective, what it gets right, what it gets wrong, right? what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks of the perspective. And then you are going to explain how two of the following would do their job if they were governed by the perspective that you've been assigned. And so this kind of links back to what we learned in topic 1 with the different actors within the criminal justice system. And so you choose two. And so if you were a police officer and you were governed by the rehabilitation perspective, how would you do your job? If you were a correctional agent and you were governed by the crime control perspective, how would it affect how you did your job? Okay. And so that you sort of apply your perspective to agents within the criminal justice system. And then finally, you'll be asked which of the 6 perspectives comes closest to your own perspective. You can choose your assigned perspective, but you don't have to. And also, you don't have to choose just one. You can choose more than one because, as I said at the beginning, no one perspective does a good enough job of sort of helping us have an understanding of the goals of the criminal justice system. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for paying attention. Appreciate it. Sorry if my voice is a little raspy, but I think I have a little bit of a cold. So thanks for hanging in there, and I will talk to you again soon.